Good morning. So it's 1999, and Ken Theory, who goes by KT, has a big problem. He's been invited to take over a company with a horrible name. It's called Total Renal Care. It's in the healthcare industry. And the company is completely fledgling. It's on the edge of bankruptcy. It's under investigation by the SEC. It has a low employee morale. Top executives are leaving. They've been completely operating in the command and control hierarchical model. And they've invited KT, who's a 43-year-old Harvard MBA, to come in and turn around the company. And rather than taking the traditional slash and burn way of doing it, KT decides he wants to take an entirely different approach. He says, well, what if, instead of thinking about this as a company, what if we instead thought of ourselves as a democratic community? How would we work that then? What would happen if we shifted our mindset to this community-oriented approach? And so he did just that, and he invited others to come along with him on this journey. And they started to make that mindset shift. And as a result, they transformed the design of the organization. And they said, hey, if we're going to be a community, does a community have a CEO? Maybe not. So KT started to call himself the mayor of their village. Well, what else does a community do? They have town hall meetings. They hear the voice of the people. They have authentic conversations. They decentralize power, which is what they did, moved it from corporate out to their 1,600 clinics across the nation. They even had voting, and they voted to change their name from Total Renal Care to DaVita, which means giving life. As a result of this, it transformed their leadership style. And they voted on 7 core values that guide the behavior of their community. Core values like fulfillment and integrity and accountability. DaVita has now gone from being on the edge of bankruptcy in 1999 to a $12 billion Fortune 400 industry leader. They're based here in Denver now. They just built a beautiful new headquarters, LEED certified, and they're a 6-time WorldBlu certified democratic workplace. Now, did KT take this approach, this, let's call it more freedom-centered approach, because he was all woo-woo and kumbaya, burning incense in his office? No, he took this approach because he understood that freedom, rather than fear and control in the workplace, creates the optimal conditions for performance. It creates the optimal conditions where we can actualize as individuals and the organization can also flourish. And what I believe in almost 2 decades of doing this work is that when we intentionally and deliberately choose to design our workplaces using the principles of freedom and democracy, rather than fear and control, we unleash human potential, build world-class organizations, and change the world for the better. Now, the problem is most of our organizations don't operate on freedom, do they? They operate on fear. And we don't always call it fear. Fear wears many masks. What are some of the masks that you see that fear wears in the workplace? Just go ahead and call them out. Ego. Control. What else? Deadlines. What else? Gossip. What else? Budget. What else? Politics. What else? Bureaucracy. Backstabbing. What? Clicks. I think we're getting the idea, aren't we? Fear wears many, many masks, but what I've seen is fear is at the root of all of these symptoms, and if we can figure out how to get at the root of it, we truly can transform our organizations. Now, the problem with fear, some people think, but fear is a great motivator. It's how I get my people to do things and, get things done. But the problem with fear is that the research shows that when we're in a state of fear, it actually makes us myopic and it shuts down the peripheries of our brain. And we can only see one point of view. Now that's fine if you're a gazelle running from a cheetah in the African savannah, and the only thing you need to think about doing is running. But that's not going to work so well if you need to be performing at a creative and innovative level in the workplace. Fear is not what we need to motivate ourselves. What we need is a greater sense of freedom and possibility. But what I've seen is most organizations are trapped in what I call the fear at work cycle. The fear at work cycle starts with this mindset of fear. When we're in a mindset of fear, what do we want to do? We want to control. And then that leads itself to fear-based control in our organizations. Bureaucracy, hierarchy, the command and control structure, all of these things that have characterized the industrial age way of organizing. And when we then design our organizations to control and micromanage people, that's exactly how we lead them. We lead them from a place of micromanagement, of greed, and of not having high levels of trust. I experienced this myself. Before I started WorldBlu, my first real job, we'll call it, in the beginning of my career was for a Fortune 500 company. I was so excited. I walked into work the first day, ready to engage, ready to make a contribution, ready to bring my whole self to the experience. And literally by the end of day one, I knew that this was going to be a horrible, toxic, dehumanizing, fear-based environment. And it was not how I wanted to spend my days. I ended up resigning from that job 4 months later. And when I went in to resign, my boss said to me, "I knew you had too much self-respect to let yourself be treated the way we treat people here." So even he knew how horrible and fear-based that environment was. So what do we need to do instead? Well, what we need to do is get in what I call the freedom at work cycle. And the freedom at work cycle is something that we've developed, again, based on almost 2 decades of working with leading brands all over the world. We're in 80 countries now, and studying their models, studying how these leaders work, studying how the employees work within the company. And we've sort of codified it into this idea of the freedom at work cycle. And I'm going to give you an overview. Our time is limited. I'm going to give you an overview, but we can go deeper into some of these on our website, and we're going to double click down into one of them in one moment. So the freedom at work cycle, obviously in contrast to the fear at work cycle, is starting with a more freedom-based mindset. When we have a more freedom-based mindset, we don't want to create control structures, do we? We want to create structures that are more democratic, that are more about giving power to the people. And WorldBlu spent a decade asking the question, what exactly is democracy? And can it be applied in our workplaces? Most people think of democracy, and I know this is how I started off thinking about it, that it means voting, or it means, oh my gosh, we're sitting in endless meetings, or it means there's no leader, the inmates are running the asylum, or all the different myths that come up with democracy. And I would offer to you that those myths are the result of us not really understanding what democracy is. And so the way that WorldBlu defines democracy is that it's a set of 10 principles, not practices, but principles that must be in operation in order to truly have a democratic system. They're principles like transparency, accountability, choice, decentralization of power, dialogue and listening, the balance of the individual and the collective. When all 10 principles are in operation, you will have a truly democratic system. Now, out of that more freedom-centered design, and that's what organizational democracy does, it gives the framework for freedom. Then we lead in an entirely different way. We have values that are more aligned and behaviors that are more aligned with releasing full potential rather than trying to control and stymie it. Now, what I want to do in our few moments together is focus on that first part of the cycle, the freedom-centered mindset, because I really believe that's where it starts in order to create these truly freedom-centered cultures within companies. Now, you might say, well, how do you switch your mindset from fear-based, which most of us are in fear, we don't even realize it. I know every day I'm like, wow, I'm completely in a state of fear right now, and I didn't think I was. But these low-grade to high-grade levels of fear, how do we make that transition to a more freedom-centered mindset? Well, we've developed something at WorldBlu that I like to call the power question. And I call it the power question because it allows us to see what we're giving power to, freedom or fear. Now, this power question isn't rocket science. I'm not saying, we hung the moon here. But The idea is that the power question helps us regain a sense of power. And we use it when we're making decisions, small decisions all the way up to big decisions. And here's the power question. The power question is, what would you do if you weren't afraid? What would you do if you weren't afraid? So like I said, I've used this power question, and my team and I use it all the time when we're thinking about strategy, when we're thinking about new clients, when we're thinking about customers we want to interface with, when we're thinking about markets to expand into. I know I use it in my personal life. I use it with my family. I use it with my friends. I use it to solve problems. What I'd like us to do this morning is I'd like you to take a moment, and I'd like you to think about a challenge that you're facing in your workplace, in your personal life. It might be something really big that's gnawing away at you. It might be just a small thing. Or maybe it's a challenge you know a friend is going through. I want you to think about that. And I'd like you to invite you to apply the power question to it. How would you solve that problem if you weren't afraid? There were no fear. And I'm going to take a moment to just have us be quiet. This isn't the time to send a Twitter message. This is the time just to think about this and think about what your answer might be to this question. Okay? I'm going to give you a minute or so here. What would you do if you weren't afraid? How would you solve the problem? What would you say? What would you do? How would you be differently? Okay. Thank you for thinking about that with me. If we had more time, I'd ask to hear what some of you came up with. You can complain to Ted about that. It was interesting. We had our WorldBlu Live Global Conference in Denver about a month ago. And I asked the power question to a room full of CEOs from around the world and top-level executives. And one of them came up to me the very next day and he said, Traci, you know, the power question was really hard for me. I had to first admit that I had fear, which can be kind of hard and make us feel very vulnerable. I had to first admit that I had fear. And then I had to address it and actually take the thing that I knew needed to change and change it. And the thing that he knew needed to change was his role in his company. He needed to leave the company. And he called his wife that evening and he said, honey, I think I gotta go. I think I gotta change jobs. This is not where my heart is. What I would do if I weren't afraid is something else. And she listened very supportively and said, I now feel like I have my husband back. And it's been a great pleasure to hear many, many stories of how people's lives have been transformed by applying the power question to the big stuff as well as the little stuff. So again, I invite you to take it back with you into your workplaces so that we can, together, start to build more freedom-centered workplaces, more freedom-centered cultures. I firmly believe that when we consciously and intentionally choose to design our workplaces based on freedom rather than fear and control, we will unleash human potential. We will build world-class, high-performing organizations, and we will change the world for the better. Thanks very much.